Chinese car companies have been producing advanced driver assistance systems for years. And when I say advanced, I mean really advanced. On paper, these systems are capable of many of the same feats as the current king of quote-unquote self-driving, Tesla FSD Beta.
But since these Chinese systems are only available in China and full FSD Beta is only available abroad, filming a comparison would be difficult, to say the least.
Why, in order to have any kind of comparison, you'd have to have somebody with extensive experience with Chinese driver assistance systems go to America and then, I don't know, complete a 400+ kilometer road trip behind the wheel of a Tesla, complete with the latest version of Tesla FSD Beta. So that's what I did.
Welcome to Wheels Boy, where we cover the newest, coolest, and wildest vehicles from the Chinese car market. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Since I couldn't use FSD Beta in China, I took a plane from Shanghai to California, where I borrowed a Tesla Model 3 and drove it up and down the coast, including highways, byways, and the city streets of Silicon Valley and San Francisco, logging hundreds of kilometers with the system.
Now I'm going to compare my experience using the leading system from abroad with the best that China has to offer. My representative from Tesla is a Tesla Model 3. Not this 2023 Model 3, it's just a stand-in for the 2018 Model 3 that I drove up and down the coast of California.
That Model 3 was equipped with the Hardware 3.0 update and was running FSD Beta 11.4.7.3, the latest version of FSD publicly available when I drove the car in late November 2023.
I could have chosen any number of systems from China, but I chose to go with a company who, like Tesla, has staked their reputation on the performance of their driver assistance system, XPeng. More specifically, I've chosen this 2024 XPeng G9, equipped with the latest version of their driver assistance system, XPeng Navigation Guided Pilot, or XNGP.
I have used XNGP across multiple generations and models, from the beta version first released on the XPeng P5 to later public versions on the G6 SUV and the X9 MPV. I've also driven it in multiple cities, including Guangzhou and here in Shanghai.
I know, I'm comparing a 2018 vehicle to a 2024, but since that 2018 Model 3 that I drove in the US had the Hardware 3.0 update and the latest version of FSD Beta software, it is in essence the same as a 2023 when it comes to driver assistance. And remember, this is not a comparison of these two vehicles. It's a comparison of the two systems. I don't care who has the softer seats or the better sound system or even the longer range. I only care how FSD compares to XNGP. If you're looking for a review of the G9, we've got one of those, so be sure to check it out. So let's start comparing them, starting with hardware. The first and most important thing you need to understand about these two systems is that they have a very different approach to perception. Tesla is vision-based. That means it relies solely on the information provided by its 9 cameras.
The systems used here in China, including XNGP, are vision first, meaning cameras are their main but not only form of perception. In addition to its 11 cameras, the XNGP system on the G9 utilizes inputs from 2 LiDAR units, 12 ultrasonic radar units, 5mm wave radar units, and a high precision positioning unit.
That's 31 perception units compared to the 9 of the Tesla. This sensor fusion takes advantage of the fact that all these different kinds of perception have their own strengths and weaknesses. For example, cameras produce very high definition images, and they're the only sensor that can interpret and read 2D objects, i.e. road markings or traffic signs. But LiDAR works better than cameras in the dark. Radar is less precise than LiDAR, but it's unaffected by weather. XNGP also relies on high definition mapping, so unlike FSD, you can't just turn it on anytime, anywhere. I think there might be some technical limitations involved in that, but regulatory issues probably play a larger role.
That's quickly changing, as XPeng has now made mapless XNGP available in over 200 Chinese cities. Both Tesla and Xpeng also have an increasing reliance on AI modeling and the supercomputers required to process those models. Xpeng's competitor to Tesla's recently announced Dojo supercomputer is called XNet 2.0.
The advantage of all these different inputs, in theory, is redundancy, because the system doesn't have to rely on a single form of perception. Instead, it can combine all those different forms of perception to create a more accurate, completer picture of the world around it upon which to base its driving decisions. The disadvantage is higher cost and greater complexity, necessitating greater computing power in order to make sure that all those inputs don't just confuse the system into driving like a lunatic. In Teslas, you can get FSD Beta simply by paying for it and downloading the software upgrade. XNGP, however, is only available on Xpeng models that have the optional LiDAR units and the extra Drive Orin chip for a total of 508 TOPS computing power versus the 144 TOPS of the Tesla. Which system is better? Well, there's a real debate to be had there, but I tend to think that redundancy is your friend when you're talking about a task as complex and potentially dangerous as driving. But enough tech talk. Let's get to the juicy bits.
I'm breaking this comparison into 3 sections: highway performance, urban performance, and driver monitoring. I'll discuss how each system handles those environments, including what they do well and what they do poorly.
Starting with the easy bit, highway driving. This is an area where these two systems perform at a very similar level, at least in most circumstances. They're both able to easily merge onto the highway, making flawless lane changes, including automatic overtaking, mind you. They're also able to easily maintain a safe distance between them and the car in front of them through smooth braking inputs.
That's not to say the two systems are identical, because they certainly are not.
I have to say, having used the FSD Beta to go across 500 kilometers, including quite a bit of highway and transitions from one highway to another, it does transition between highways with a confidence that I haven't seen in many other systems. It maintains a speed that feels much more natural, as opposed to other systems that will stop down to very, very low speeds that frankly make you into an obstacle for other traffic. The G9, it falls somewhere in between the two of those. It doesn't slow to a crawl, but it certainly doesn't proceed as quickly as Tesla FSD Beta. I appreciate a conservative approach, but when it gets too slow, it can be a little bit annoying. I think the reason they do this, beyond any philosophical difference between the two systems, is the fact that China has a ton of speed cameras. That's something that Tesla FSD Beta doesn't really have to deal with as much in the United States, so I'm curious as to whether this system would be tuned differently if it were available in the US, or if FSD Beta would be tuned differently if it was available here in China. Speaking of transitioning between highways, the G9 had a bad habit of scanning the speed limit signs for exits that I was driving by. That means that I would be proceeding down a highway whose speed limit was, say, 100 kilometers per hour, and all of a sudden the car would adjust the cruise control speed down to 40 kilometers per hour. It wouldn't slam on the brakes or anything, it would just steadily start to drop its speed until I manually adjusted it. This isn't the only Chinese system that has this problem. I don't know if it has to do with the design of the road signs here in China, where they're all kind of on the same plane. I don't know, and I don't care. It's really annoying.
On the highway, I have to give the edge to FSD Beta. But what about the proverbial hard mode of driver assistance, city streets?
Overseas, Tesla FSD Beta has long been the sole occupant of this segment of the market, as it was the only one capable of such feats. Or, at the very least, Tesla was the only company willing to take the risk of making such a system available for public use.
I first drove the Model 3 through suburban Santa Clara, California, which is more challenging than a highway, but still quite tame. FSD Beta did a lot right, including reading and understanding road markings and traffic signs, and stopping where it should, when it should. But when I upped the ante, FSD's charms started to fade.
Undoubtedly, the weakest performance provided by FSD was in the streets of San Francisco. At no point while driving this car in that circumstance did I feel like it was confident in almost anything that it was doing.
The system was hesitant to make turns, especially when confronted with the presence of bicyclists or pedestrians, which are far more prevalent in Chinese cities. Again, I appreciate a conservative approach, but the start-stop-start nature of those turns confused me and likely the pedestrians and motorists around me.
In yet another situation, it was in a designated right-hand lane, and yet it was insisting on going straight. Had I not intervened, we would not only have broken the law, but it would have been a potentially very dangerous situation.
So does XNGP, with its multitude of sensors and high-definition maps, handle the complexities of city driving with more skill? To find out, I drove the G9 in Shanghai in early afternoon traffic on a weekday, the same time period when I drove the Model 3 in San Francisco.
XNGP isn't miles ahead of Tesla FSD, but it did feel more confidence-inspiring in some very complex situations that I encountered here in Shanghai. Situations that were certainly much more complex than anything that I saw while driving in California. Part of that has to do with the fact that it still relies on HD maps, which means it's easier for it to avoid simple mistakes such as going straight in a turn lane. I want to be crystal clear on this. I am not insisting that the Chinese systems are perfect. Indeed, there have been circumstances in which I was using a Chinese driver assistance system and it made decisions that made me feel unsafe. However, it made those decisions in the context of a Chinese city. San Francisco might be a complex city by American standards, but by Chinese standards, I mean, honestly, it pales in comparison. It also must be acknowledged that there's one area where FSD definitely beats XNGP in city traffic, and that's steering effort. What I mean, as I transition between lanes here, is that when auto steer from Tesla decides to make a lane change, it uses a appropriate and decent amount of torque to do so, and you, in response, have to use a decent and appropriate amount of torque to cancel that lane change. That means that if you're naturally resting your hands on the steering wheel, it won't automatically cancel the maneuver. In fact, it will be able to complete it without any problem. XNGP, on the other hand, takes much less effort to cancel a lane change. That means that, on occasion, if you are resting your hands naturally on the steering wheel, you can unintentionally cancel a lane change and exit the system for a few seconds. They've improved it a lot since I used it behind the wheel of the Xpeng G6 in Guangzhou in 2023. It's graduated from being downright frustrating to just, room for improvement. Now, let's transition to the final area of comparison, and one that is absolutely vital when you're talking about driver assistance systems as advanced as these are: driver monitoring.
Tesla has received criticism for the ease with which you can fool FSD into thinking that there is an attentive driver behind the wheel, resulting in plenty of footage of Teslas going down the road with a teddy bear in the driver's seat or even no one at all. This is possible because Tesla relies on a torque sensor in the steering wheel to ensure driver attention. They're allegedly also using the in-cabin camera as well, but that thing is clearly not doing its job.
In order to be accepted into the FSD Beta program, you have to reach certain safety milestones. Once you are approved for the program, if you have a forced disengagement while driving, you will lose auto steer privileges until the end of that drive. If you have 5 forced disengagements, you lose FSD Beta privileges entirely, and it will take you a while to get them back. Most sources that I referred to said anywhere from weeks to months. Xpeng takes a different tack because their XNGP system is tied to the hardware, that means the 2 LiDAR units and the extra chip that the customer has already paid for when they bought the car. They have a system in which people who want to use XNGP are required to watch an instructional video and then take a 21-question test. Even then, they are stuck in what's called rookie mode until they have used the system 7 different times across 100 kilometers of road. Rookie mode also limits you to specific roads, and those do not include highways and elevated roads. Xpeng also has a different approach when it comes to driver monitoring. In addition to the torque sensor in the wheel that the Tesla has, they add an eyeline camera, just like the Cadillac Super Cruise system. That means that if I'm driving and I look away from the road for an extended period of time, I'm on a pretty empty road, so I'm going to demonstrate that right now for you.
请保持关注路况。
The system will warn me to pay attention to what is ahead of me. If I do not respond to the eye line warnings or the torque sensor warnings from the steering wheel, the system will deactivate. Each driver profile tied to the vehicle has what's called a safety score. Now, that safety score starts at 100 and drops with repeated abuse. That can mean things like not taking over when prompted or, not paying attention repeatedly while driving. If that score drops down to 0, that driver is demoted to rookie mode and has to rewatch the instructional video and retake that 21-question test. My ideal system? It would combine the stricter driver monitoring of XNGP with the 5 strikes rule of FSD Beta. If someone who is using the Wheelsboy driver assistance system, patent pending, were to get their 5 strikes, they would be banned from using the system for 1 month. During that month, they would then have to bring their safety score back up to, say, 90 or 100, at which point they would be required to rewatch that instructional video and retake the test. Then they could do rookie mode. Does that sound over the top, not user-friendly, draconian even? Good, it should be. These systems are nothing if not flawed at this point in their development, and I think we should set the bar for using them as high as reasonably possible. Does that mean that fewer people will opt into the system, which means less data and potentially slower development? Yeah, it probably does. But this is not something we should be rushing to market, so personally, I'm fine with that. Before I begin my conclusion to the video, I just want to acknowledge the fact that this is not an ideal comparison of these two systems. In an ideal world, I would have been able to drive them in the exact same circumstances, or at least as close to it as possible, ideally even the same countries, but that's just not possible at this point since they're not available in the same country. Still, I feel like this comparison is worthwhile as it's the best we can do for now. If you were someone who was really bothered by these flaws, you probably haven't watched to this point of the video anyways, but if you have, thank you very much. As you can imagine, this took a lot of effort to make. I want to thank my team here in the car in China and also my videographer over in America. Appreciate it, Matt. So, having spent so much time with these two systems, and while acknowledging the imperfections of our little comparison, which of them would I give the win? Well, first and foremost, my biggest takeaway is the fact that despite their very different approaches to driver assistance, they have remarkably similar capabilities.
On the highway, both systems were very easy to use, though FSD Beta drove more naturally and didn't misread speed limits like XNGP. In city environments, Tesla's auto steer is second to none in its precision, but XNGP, with its HD maps, made fewer obvious navigation mistakes and was much more confident when surrounded by pedestrians, bicyclists, and other road goers. Only time and maybe a future test will tell if the system performs this well in one of the 200+ cities that don't require HD mapping. Finally, when it comes to driver monitoring systems, XNGP's combination of steering wheel torque sensor and eye-line camera is undoubtedly the harder one to fool. I just wish they would institute an outright temporary ban from the system like Tesla, not just a downgrade. With a comparison like this, it feels a little disingenuous to announce an outright winner, but I think we've made it clear just how close these systems are in their capabilities and the type of challenges that Tesla will face when they finally release FSD Beta in the Chinese market.
So there you have it, the best attempt at a comparison between FSD and a Chinese system that we can provide until either the Chinese start selling their systems abroad or FSD comes to China. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell because when that happens, we might just make another video.